right, thanks, Nick, for the introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about the work that I've been doing for the last year or so, which is updating conservation status ranks for our threatened and endangered plants in Illinois. S rank basically stands for subnational rank in Canada or state rank in the US. And this is basically part of a system of ranks, national and global ranks assessed through NatureServe, which is a conservation nonprofit. This is really important for consistency. So not all state departments of natural resources have the same criteria for listing different plants and getting them protection. So this is a consistent basically rank throughout the nation or the states or basically across the world. So Illinois' ranks really needed to be updated. So most ranks actually had not been updated since the 80s. And the original criteria for updating these ranks were not substantial. Usually you would find listing criteria being just given due to low population and trends without any real clear evidence for the numbers of the population. And many species also need to be taxonomically updated. So this is a Platantha flava urbiola, which is an orchid with two subspecies. This is the northern one, and down in southern Illinois, we have Flava flava. The distinction between these two meant that they were, before they were separated, they were lumped together, and so it wasn't receiving quite the same amount of attention. In order to start this process of updating the ranks, we gathered data. So the primary source is Biotics, which is the natural heritage database. So this is where all of our threatened animals, plants, basically anything that is tracked by the state DNR is mapped. Also we drew from physical and online herbaria. I came and visited the SIU herbarium and found some interesting specimens there. Also, we use iNaturalist and this GBIF, which draws from iNaturalist and other herbarium specimens. We also looked at published and gray literature. So one of the first characteristics for determining the S rank is this range in area of occupancy. So basically, it's using an area within three points of the convex hull. So these are each using 4-kilometer grid cells, as you can see there. So this basically determines one of the components of the ranks. The other thing is abundance and number of occurrences, which is really important for ranks. The population is usually super important, but the annual plants are often not factored into rankings because they can have such wide fluctuations. So the other thing we evaluate as a part of this is basically the integrity of the plant population. So how robust are they? How likely are they to basically continue on, persist basically for 20 or more years? Threats. So threats can be sort of based on the scope and the severity. So how much is going, basically what percent of the population is affected and how much will be lost. So their immediate threats, unfortunately, like Bell Bowl Prairie, if you all have heard about, was just bulldoze, one of our last remaining gravel hill prairies. And climate change is another threat that's really big for a lot of these plants as well. And so for the long-term trends, we pull from the last 200 years. So this is often using this botanical atlas of North America, which maps basically plant data county records. So this is a really nifty tool, although to be taken with a grain of salt, because sometimes these county records can be wrong. But we basically account for that and also written accounts of abundance. The other thing we evaluate too within determining our long-term trends is basically overall wetland loss. So the prairie has basically been decimated here, so we would take the species niche and extract that and basically look at the entire loss within the state. And so this is a map of wild rice, which is now only in a few holds left in the state. So the other factor is short-term trends. So this can really influence the species status rank. And basically, so a good example of this, an unfortunate example, is the Virginia bunchflower, which is mostly found in railroad prairies, has basically been decimated due to excessive herbicide and mowing. So we'll get into a few of the ranks. So the first rank is state unrankable. So this is a species called the Posey County blackberry, where there is not only a total lack of data in Illinois, but the species itself is not technically considered robust enough. So it was described, but not everyone agrees on it. So this is a species we would call unrankable. The second major rank is SX, or state extirpated. So a good example for this is Thismia, which is basically the site where it was originally found was completely developed. This was a Chicago area endemic. Although hunts for the species still occur, it's widely considered extirpated by experts. So the third category is state historical, and this is one I'm especially interested in. These are species which haven't been seen in over 20 years in the state. So this is a good example of one, a northern orchid, where habitat degradation and poaching has caused severe declines. Some individuals may be left, but they haven't been seen in 20 years. They're in usually pretty hard to access and somewhat degraded shrub bogs. So this is an example. We have a good deal of these species in the state. And the criteria for historical records is interesting. So up until recently, it was considered 10 years was something was historical in the state. And while that might work for certain species, it doesn't really work for a lot. So if someone just wasn't visiting, for example, a shortleaf pine stand, but it was still in existence, it would be hard to consider that historical. And also a lot of species that don't basically come up every year, like eruptive annuals, so that makes it even trickier. So we are currently trying to use this 20-year standard as a better guideline. And so with this 20-year standard, we've relocated in the last year 5 species that are entirely historical. Sorbus americana, or mountain ash. This is one where we actually have one tree in Illinois. It's pretty much one of the rarest plants. This is Echinodoros tenalis. This is a little sand pond annual. It will really only come up in the right conditions. Mirabilis hirsuta, which is more of a western species in the Great Plains and further west. Cornus canadensis, the Canadian bunchberry. This one also hadn't been seen. And then Fimbristylis, which we found over at Devil's Bake Oven. This actually washed up in the current low year, which is a weird one. It hadn't been seen anywhere around there for a long time. So the next and the first major rank I want to talk about is S1. So this is basically an indication that the population is at extreme risk of extirpation. So here, one from Southern Illinois, that's this species, is Camelarium luteum, or devil's fairy wand. So there's really only 3 populations left in Illinois, all in Southern Illinois. And the recent declines and overall downward trends in the species indicate that this is one that we really need to be paying attention to closely. S2, one of the species that's a pretty good standard bearer for that is the American strawberry bush, or Euonymus americanus. There are some pretty robust populations, and a lot of them are stable, but there's still only 10 state populations. And it does have extensive threats. It gets browsed by deer pretty badly in some areas. The third is S3, and this is a really good example of an S3 species. This is Malotria pendula. Now, this is one that is actually probably going to get delisted, so taken off the threatened and endangered list. There are over 20 occurrences, and the existing populations are mostly stable or actually growing. And this is one that's actually been expanding its range, but it still remains rare. So this rank is basically used to indicate species that are rare and vulnerable, but not necessarily at a high risk of extirpation. The next 2 ranks, which are S4 and S5, both indicate that it's pretty secure. An S5 species might be something like white oak that you would find throughout the state. Usually, there's many occurrences of it, and there's quite a lot of there's really no imminent threats. There can also be borderline ranks. So this is one, the Missouri coneflower, which is out west in the hill prairies. The hill prairie habitat has been severely reduced. And in general, a lot of hill prairies are pretty degraded, but there are still a few that are really quite robust populations. So this one is considered basically on the cusp of being really imperiled and doing a little bit better. So some of the overall rank updates. So we ranked all all species in the state, all of the listed species. So 157 remain S1, like that camelarium. 12 remain S2, and that's like Planera aquatica, the water elm. 63 species actually changed. One of those is shortleaf pine, Pinus echinata, which y'all might have seen at Pine Hills or Piney Creek. 10 species actually really jumped from S1 to S3. That would be like Melotera pendula. So that was a species where even in the last 30 or 40 years, the ranking has really changed. 9 species actually also became less of a concern. Styrax americanus we've found a lot of populations thanks to a lot of the great work from folks down here. So a lot of new populations for that. 2 species actually became of greater concern. One is Juglin cinerea, that's butternut. That one's getting absolutely hammered by a disease. So that's one to really keep good track of. And then that Melanthium virginicum, the Virginia bunch flowers, pretty much only in railroad prairies, which are not protected. And a few others changed also. Hidden tails, bleeding hearts. These are species that basically due to hill prairie encroachment of cedars and degradation have also been reduced. And many were also assigned to these intermediate categories as well. So the other thing that we've been working on is we've been working on creating this Illinois watch list. So this is basically designed to account for species which aren't listed at the state level, but might be rare. So the first criteria is that there's basically potential for an imminent decline. And yeah, so basically poaching, disease, any of those factors could lead to the decline, but it is vulnerable. The second is that actually it's not common in Illinois, but it's listed in other states. So this is basically one of the more interesting things that we wanted to develop, to focus on species where Illinois is actually might have the largest population. The other one is species that have actually been delisted but might be changing. Climate change is a big one for these. A lot of species that got delisted about 20 years ago might actually be more vulnerable to climate change than previously imagined. And the fourth one, which is a cool one, new species to Illinois flora that are actually considered rare. So this is one, this Uvularia floridana. This is actually newly discovered in Illinois. This is a coastal plain disjunct that was formerly not known from the state. So this is an example I like to use for our watch list, where if you look at this distribution, Illinois actually has more counties than any other state. So this is a great example because Illinois is a stronghold, but it's still in all of these unprotected areas. You find this in old pioneer cemeteries, which haven't been mowed. And because of this, because it's in parallel in surrounding states and we have a great population, we really want to make sure we track this. Yeah. So there are a lot of folks who helped out with this project. Plants of Concern has really been a fantastic partnership for us. Everyone involved in Plants of Concern has really been doing great work for monitoring our rare populations. So all of these folks, Gretel, Katie, Grant, Chris, everyone has helped out in a lot of ways. Also, the natural areas preservation specialists have really been massively helpful, because I'm sure all of you know there's a lot of great natural heritage on private sites, and so accessing those can sometimes be tricky. So we really rely on those folks. And then the people who share on iNaturalist. So if y'all are posting on iNaturalist, this can be a really useful way to find a lot of new populations, or just get a better idea about how the species is doing in the state. The other people I want to thank, everyone at the Department of Natural Resources who's been pushing to update these ranks. So that has been a really great partnership for us, and all of my supervisors who are just fantastic botanists and have helped me grow immensely. So with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.